well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Second Amendment.
Once again, this is Joe. I'm here today with my normal co-host, Leigh Castle.
Yes, sir.
How you doing?
Here we are.
Here we are.
I'm excited.
I'm excited about this.
This is a good one. Yeah, me too.
Absolutely. Today we are visited by Carl Gray, who is an account executive with Delta Defense. Did I say that properly?
You got it right on the head. Thanks for having me, Joe. Leigh, appreciate you having me here.
Absolutely. We're very glad that you agreed to come to this podcast with us.
Yeah, you're the first guest we've had on where I knew the person before we have done the interview.
Oh, nice.
And you're one of my favorite people, Carl. I met you not that long ago. Is it even been a year yet?
Yeah, maybe just a little over a year. Yeah, when I
you know, you because of your background, you seem like an infinitely fascinating person. But then you're just like one of the nicest people I've ever met. So I thought that having you're one of the first people that came to my mind when Joe and I decided to do interviews. So I'm glad that we finally got around to it.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me, and I feel the same way. I was so happy when I was able to track you down. I know you weren't doing classes for a little bit there, but then you're like, hey, yeah, no, I'm ready to go. It's like, awesome. You know, with your background and everything, that's exactly the kind of instructors we're looking for.
Awesome. Thank you.
Carl, one of the things that I wanted to just ask you right off the bat before we dive into several topics, I assume, is the Second Amendment to the Constitution. What does that mean to you as an individual?
So I won't do like a definition, but what I'd say it means to me is that just you're able to protect yourself. You know, if we go back and you look at some of the verbiage, you know, militia back then meant a whole lot different than it does now. That's almost the equivalent of, you know, something's happening in the next town and it's, hey, Leigh, Joe, we have to go. It was just protecting a community, right?
Right.
Things were so much different then. You know, we all have the right to keep and bear arms, but that meant a lot. I think it was so much more important actually just defending yourself back then. You know, there was no police force, you know, just because there was.
Yeah, there really wasn't.
Right. You know, if we look at it the way crime is reported now, like the uniform crime reporting, right? The FBI does. That didn't come around till the 30s, but that doesn't mean there weren't murderers and sexual assaults and all those kind of things back then. I mean, this was meant for people to protect themselves.
And as the nation was growing, the Wild West wasn't called the Wild West for no reason.
Right.
A lot of chaos, and you know, having a firearm and being able to use it and be proficient was a way to protect yourself, your family, your property, your ranch. You know, things of that nature. Do you believe or agree with a certain amount of restrictions on the Second Amendment in terms of what people are allowed to own?
So I am no fan of restrictions. I wish that more people would get educated and trained.
Sure.
I love the right, but the thing that kills me is some people think that they can just, you know, go buy a handgun or a rifle and take it to the range. They have no clue. They didn't have any education, any training with it. I know, you know, we've talked, Joe, and you started trap shooting in, what was it, high school?
Yeah, a friend took me out and kind of got me hooked on that aspect of firearms for a while. Right,
and Leigh, the same thing. You were shooting from a pretty young age, right?
Not quite as young. The first time I fired a weapon was in basic training, and so I was 19 years old, and I was a young private in the United States Army, and that was the first time I shot a gun.
Oh, okay. But then even after that, I mean, you just immersed yourself in it, and you became so educated, you trained.
Yeah, I really wound up enjoying. I made it into the 75th Ranger Regiment, and one of the hallmarks of Rangers, like Marines, is their marksmanship. And so every Ranger is expected to be an absolute expert on all of their small arms. But in addition to that sort of being the requirement, was I just wound up being very interested in it as well. So there was a personal drive as well. So
right.
Professional drive, but a personal drive. And I really did. I didn't have the most glorious, Ranger career, certainly not. But I definitely took being a Ranger very seriously. And it was a great sense of pride for me. And so I I tried to live that we have a Ranger creed, and I tried to live my life in accordance with that creed. I sort of drank that Kool-Aid, and I still do today. It made it was a pivotal change in my life, and so yeah, firearms is a natural. After that big change, but prior to that, no guns.
Right. But like you said, once you were in it and you came back, you knew all about it. You were safe. You were proficient, and
Absolutely.
and that's where I think a lot of people lack. You know,
You're definitely talking to a couple people that are huge proponents of the training aspect. It's almost immeasurable how much of a difference a little bit of training does, and then on top of that, if it's something somebody takes very serious, for me personally, it almost becomes a way of life.
right.
It really does. Between carrying a firearm and then training with it, so I absolutely understand where you're coming from in terms of allowing everybody to be able to own and purchase a firearm, which I'm a proponent of. I would like to see a lot more people train a lot more. Nothing bad comes from being better trained.
Right. Absolutely. And it's, I've spent a lot of time in Indiana, and Indiana's a lot different than Illinois. Obviously, the constitutional carry and open carry. And you'll find people that take it very seriously, and then some people who they'll just go and strap it on, and it just makes them feel good. Mm-hmm. And you try to tell people, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to be more of a danger to yourself and someone else. And it doesn't take much, a couple hours in the beginning and, 20 minutes a week just to stay current. And
Yep, absolutely. I think it was our last podcast we focused on training.
You read my thoughts, Joe.
Yeah, and a lot of it was you don't even have to train with bullets. Dry fire training, certain aspects of there's technology out there, software with such as the Mantis has some phenomenal options out there, and it could be done 15, 20 minutes a day. You don't even have to leave the house.
And so I love that you brought up dry firing. There's a young man, he's in Indiana. His name's Lance Bratcher Jr., and he holds, I think, 7 world shooting titles, some crazy amount. And I think he dry fires like 40,000 trigger pulls a year.
No kidding.
And it's just because it's the most effective, least expensive form of training. And the kid is phenomenal. Well, he's a grown man now. Anybody under 40 these days is a kid, right? A real nice young man. I only met him a couple of times, but really on top of his game. And that's the thing, you dry fire 15, 20 minutes a week, and your time spent at the range is just going to be so much more valuable.
Yeah, your range time should just confirm that what you're doing in dry fire is working. You can't really yet. We've talked about this as well, Joe. We can't really replicate recoil control, but everything else is pretty much there in dry fire, and so you could get so much done, and that is the way to make progress.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unless you're just so wealthy where money's not an option and you can spend.
Right. But
hours and days at the range.
Before kids, and when before my parents kicked me out because I just would spend money on guns and stuff like that. But you just kind of getting back to the dry firing. I remember when I went through the police academy many years ago. They would tell you, hey, you're going to go home and you're going to dry fire, and the kids the recruits who didn't. They knew, those instructors, it stood out. It's like, you absolutely did not do anything that we told you to do.
There was a discernible difference.
Oh, huge,
no
massive, kidding. Yeah. And I would say more so maybe with some of the people who were brand new to it. Like I've been shooting, I think, since, my dad used to take me like as far back as like 1986. So I was always around handguns and stuff like that. But it was for the people who were brand new to shooting and just kind of sloughed it off, it was extremely noticeable.
That's interesting.
So, Carl, your dad's got you shooting at a young age. How old do you think?
I was probably maybe 8th grade.
Okay.
I was doing some .22 shooting, rifle shooting, before that. But
what was his? Was he a police officer?
Yeah, so he was a police officer. I still have the revolver. I shoot that pretty frequently. But it's funny. I won't carry that because in the event that something ever did happen, I'd never see that firearm again. If you ever had to use it in self-defense,
Right.
That gun will be kept till I'm dead and everybody in that case is dead and then destroyed.
Wow.
So, pretty early. But ammunition was still expensive. It wasn't like we were loaded.
When did you know that you wanted to be a police officer?
Oh, I think somewhere around 3 or 4.
Really?
Yeah, it was.
Pretty early on, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
In way back in the 70s, you remember like the Chips and T.J. Hooker and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so you grew up in Chicago?
Yeah, right by Midway Airport.
Okay.
There all my life. And then I started off, law enforcement-wise, I started off in corrections. I spent 2 years working in Cook County. And then after that, went to Chicago Police Department. I was there for 12 years. And after about 12 years there, they had an openings at Berwyn, and I wanted to move out of the city, get a little more land, and kind of get out of Cook County. Can we say that?
Stretch out.
Sure.
A little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's how I ended up out there.
Okay.
So.
And when did you make the shift to your career as a detective?
So I was a detective.
And how'd that come about? Like, that's a big change.
Well, so you know what? When I first got on the job, that wasn't something I really aspired to be.
Right.
I used to work on a TAC team. I worked in gang intelligence, and a big part of that would be, you're responding to shootings. A big part of working TAC, a lot of people would just go out and maybe aggressively look for stuff.
Yes.
Do street stops and everything. I was kind of getting drawn to, hey, this is a case reports on robberies. These are burglaries going on in there, and so then I found myself kind of gravitating to that, trying to put the pieces together, and then talking to whichever detective was working that, and then I think I had about 2 years in Berwyn before, maybe 2.5 years, and then I made detective there. But it was I like putting the pieces together. I like getting the stories out of people. I like interviewing, those kind of things. So that
Did you stay in that career field then as a detective right up until you retired, or did you ever go back to patrol?
So no, I made sergeant right before before I retired. But yeah, for the last probably 10 years of my career, I was a detective, and it was it was a good time. There's good times and there's frustrating times.
Yeah.
There's times where you think people should be charged, and there's the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, and they have in Cook County what's called felony review. So you have to present your case once you gather all your evidence, and you have somebody you've arrested, or you're trying to get them charged. You have to go through the felony review process, and that can be frustrating at sometimes. They may say, "Oh, well, we need this and that and the other," and you may disagree with them. I think the case could go forward without it, and so there's times it could be.
Is that to like a panel or to a DA that says, I don't have enough here for a conviction, so I don't want to take the case, or is it more of a like a board?
So felony review. So we'd give you an instance. Say there was a gang shooting or something like that, right? And you have an arrest in there, and you've recovered all the evidence. You've got statements, you've got witnesses. So you'd have all your witnesses, all your evidence, everything. You'd have it all there, and then you would call felony review, and they would send out an attorney, a felony review assistant state's attorney from the felony review office. The state's attorney's office, and they would come out and they would go over the whole case again with you, and then they would re-interview all your witnesses, possibly your offender, depending if they made statements or not, and then they would decide if they were going to approve those charges or not. So that's where that prosecutorial discretion comes in.
Gotcha.
Did you find that line of work emotionally challenging?
Well, there's definitely some highs and lows.
Yeah. How'd you get through that? You have a superpower? I'm serious. When I think of detectives, I think of, I study violence. It's what I've been doing in one way or another for, it seems like, 3 decades. So I know what people do.
Right.
But I don't get to see it, and then I don't get to know them, but you did. And so I'm just wondering how, what it was that was able to get you through that. Did you have a coping strategy? What was that like for you?
I never really thought about it. I just kind of went and did it.
So you do have a superpower.
No,
Just block it all out.
my superpower is when it gets really bad, you get in the truck and you're driving home just like, "Rah!"
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, I'm good. And then you just, go about your way. But it's
awesome.
They just you need people to do that stuff, and you see a different side of people when you're in there. Like I grew up and my life was pretty good. I mean, we were by no means rich or anything like that. 5 people, 1 bathroom.
Yeah.
But parents never got divorced. No alcoholism, no domestic abuse, none of those things. And when you see all the people out there just in the general world that have so many of those issues, and things fester and all these problems happen.
Yeah.
It's nice to be able to be there for people in that position.
Yeah, and you had that support network to carry you through the tough times as a detective.
Right.
I found the same thing with my combat deployments. It helped so much to have a stable home life, both having my background being raised, but also my marriage being stable. Really, really helps keep things together when things get bad.
Yeah, I couldn't even imagine what you went through. The two are so incomparable. Yours,
Oh wow! I wouldn't have thought that. I actually would have thought the reverse.
No. I
I
mean,
would have said that the things you have to deal with or the things that you have to see would be over all those years would be just
No, I
unimaginable
can
to me.
I take a shower and the next day you shake it off and you're ready to go. There's no worrying how I can't be there for them. I mean, yeah, granted there's some long days and stuff like that,
Sure.
but it's nothing like when there's
the separation
deployments.
you're
Yeah.
talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, which
I
I
see.
think would
I see.
compound
Every day you have that support, and you can
Right.
sort of maybe leave some things at the office, so to speak,
Right,
and
absolutely.
get that contact with good people and your support network every day. I do see the difference there, but still, you have repeated exposures to. I'm sure at times the best in people, but a lot of times the absolute worst in people.
Yeah. No, I've seen some of that.
Yeah.
But I think you know what? I think my coping mechanism is to make jokes and kind of.
Some gallows humor.
Right. There's plenty of that, and just always kind of approaching it like, hey, if this is the worst thing that happens today, we're pretty good. Everybody will live to see another day.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of how I look at it.
I say that at school a lot. Tell teachers that.
Yeah. My
I
wife.
do. Everybody, they get wrapped up, and then I'm very. I don't know if I'm popular or unpopular for saying, but I'm like, hey, nobody's dying today.
Nobody's.
Yeah.
We're good.
No, absolutely.
It sounds like in both cases, though, you both mentioned stability, and it just sounds like a strong family foundation makes a world of difference.
Oh, absolutely.
And, to pivot into some of our domain, the lack of some of that is a lot of the problem out there, in regards to guns. The lack of, family structure, foundation, 2-parent household. All of that, in your guys' case, made a positive difference to be able to help you. And when it's not there, I mean, we see some of what happens when that structure and that stability doesn't exist.
Absolutely. I mean, there's some people, and you don't want to make excuses for people, but there's some people who just, it may sound bad, but never really had a chance. Where all those odds,
They just don't know better.
right? Where they're, I've talked to kids who didn't think they'd make it past 22 or 23, and why should I conform to the norms of society?
Yep. And in some cases, they don't know what those norms are.
Right.
Their norm is, cousin out on the street dealing drugs, maybe most often, or I shouldn't say most often, single parent household, brother maybe in jail or murdered. They live in a 3 or 4 square block area that consists of a lot of violence, and that's their world. That's what they know.
I remember, and it's interesting that you say that, and what we take as normal, right? I remember really early in my career, this might have been sometime in like 97. We stopped a car. It was late at night. It fit a description of a car that was used in a robbery or burglary, something like that. And I remember I said to the people in there, and it was in a pretty rough area, and I had said to the people, just in conversation, I'm like, where are you headed to? And they're like, oh, we're going to the restaurant down the street. And I'm like, well, there's no restaurant down the street. And they're like, yeah, but 52nd. And I was like, there's no restaurant there. And they're like, yeah, the Burger King. And I'm like, I have never in my life made it sound like I was going to go to Burger King as a restaurant, right?
Right.
Like that's where, hey, let's go get a nice meal. Let's go to Burger King.
Yep.
And, it was kind of an eye opener. It was like, wow, and you're right. People don't leave sometimes a mile square area. They will live their entire life there.
And if it's a bad square mile, that's their world.
Right.
That's what they know. That's what they exist in. That's most likely what they'll end up contributing to. And again, not to make excuses, but it's really unfortunate because there's the age-old question: nature versus nurture, and I think it's both in most cases. And when your nature is a terrible environment, that's most often going to create a not great person.
Well, put it like this way: if you were brought up bringing to see a relative, like if you were brought up bringing to see relatives when you're 2 or 3 years old, and you're going to Cook County and you're in the waiting room to visit people, and you think, oh, this is just where we go to visit people. This isn't,
Right.
This is normal. That's going to hardwire you maybe a little bit differently,
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe there's not the inclination to not end up there because you were going there, 2 or 3 times a month anyway.
Right, exactly.
Like there's no problem with going there.
Yeah, I know that if I ever had to go there, as an inmate, that would be like the most immense amount of shame ever.
Yeah, somehow the floor had dropped out of your
Right,
life.
like what did I do to get here?
Right.
As where, some people are just like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I'm here.
A lot of times there's already a welcoming party.
Yeah.
So there isn't that, what am I walking into? Know exactly what they're walking into.
Right.
And it's, relatives, friends, past associates.
Well, and it I don't want to say funny, but the way you mention it like that, we always, police officers always know that, like, when you bring somebody in the back and they go right to sleep, they're guilty. And they know that, yeah, okay, you send me to jail, whatever. As opposed to somebody who's arrested the first time and, they're climbing the walls and, depending, like I said, how they view it.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, that's a very interesting insight. Wow. So you've had this collection of experiences, and I think I brought this up when you've come to some of my classes and speak to people about the USCCA. I've thrown this out there before, but I'd like to do it in this more long form session. So you have this collection of experiences of being a beat police officer and then a detective, and you have all those insights that go along with those experiences. And I would really like it if you could share with our audience how those experiences inform what you see with people arming themselves and training. Where are you on that? And what do you think about the current status of firearms and the public?
I love it. I love it when I see people, getting their concealed carry license, and it's so much more of a diverse group than it was way back. I remember, because we've talked, you used to work the gun counter way back.
Yes.
We both did a little bit of that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it was just kind of like the good old boy club.
It certainly was.
And now it's just everybody, and which is great. I love it. And I think it's so important because you know what? In America today, nobody wants to be a police officer. They can't find people to do it. It's on everybody to pretty much be their own first responder. And so the fact that people are taking that up, I think it's great.
I think it's unlikely that anyone that listens to our podcast would be sort of on the fence about whether they're going to get into firearms or not. I think almost everyone would be already checking that box. But if there was someone who was on the fence, maybe a family member or a neighbor, based upon your experiences, what would you say about a woman or a dad or a young man and they're thinking about getting into that realm of self-protection? What's your advice to them? What would you say to them?
I would want to find out every reason that they thought it was a bad idea, and we'd pick them apart one by one.
Really? Wow, that's a very strong statement.
Right. I mean, it's one of the other guys I work with came up with this statement that says, we don't get a Google reminder about the day something's going to happen, right? We don't know what day it's coming, and you have to be prepared for that. People, I think, and this kind of goes back to what we were saying before about if you live in that certain area that's really rough, you're used to it. So just because you grew up in a nice area or something, people have this false impression that bad guys have boundaries.
No.
You know what I mean? That they think nothing bad is ever going to happen to me, and that's not the case. Every victim that I've talked to, over all those years, nobody ever thought that was going to be the day that happened to them, or their loved one was going to be attacked, or anything like that. It's up to you.
As a teenager, I grew up in a community that was inundated with street gangs, and I didn't participate in that. I was lucky to have a group of friends that weren't into that. Certainly, I had friends that were, but we sort of like, I'm going to go gangbang, and I would be like, okay, I'm going to go play some baseball.
Right.
But I do know that when I finally moved out of that community and when my family lived in the suburbs and later I joined the Army, it took a few years for that street mentality to wear off, to where I didn't look at every car that drove by as a possible threat, where I didn't have to worry about what colors or what clothing I was wearing depending upon where I wanted to go.
Combination of shoelace colors.
Oh,
didn't matter.
absolutely. Right. I mean, just all the things that constantly were in the back of your mind, but not very far in the back of your mind ever.
Right.
And then slowly finding out, because it's absolutely true, discovering that there's another world out there where you don't have to think that way. It took a while, and it was a big realization for me.
We see. I really appreciate what you're saying, but like me, I think everybody should think like that, right? Everybody should be situationally aware all the time, and that almost kind of goes to, and so when I lived in the city, I think I kind of fell victim to that too, where I thought, I was more aware all the time, and somewhere like when I start driving down the expressway and I'm within 5 miles of home, I'm thinking, well, there's never really any crime out here, very rarely. And you start falling into that, and you got to snap yourself back to that, hey, the bad guy can show up at any time.
Because the other side of that spectrum is complete naivety.
Correct.
Thinking it's
which is a brain virus as well, right? So that's bad. Those are the idea that nothing can happen.
Right.
Is a brain virus. The idea that every car has a threat in it is a brain virus as well. Growing up in the neighborhood I lived in, when I would see a car, and if it was a certain kind of car, and if there was a certain music, or if the windows were tinted, like all those little check marks, the likelihood that there was a threat in the car was high.
Right.
The difference is, I agree with you, Carl, that I still think that everyone's situational awareness. So if you're not noticing the car driving by you when you're taking out your trash, your situational awareness is for shit.
Right.
But the difference is in the city, I expected that there was a threat. And here, I expect that there isn't a threat unless I see indicators that show me that it potentially is. So I think that's the difference. I think the luxury that we have of living in safer communities is that we could err on the side of situational awareness needs to be up, but the expectation is probably pretty low, and you'll be right most of the time.
Right.
If you had that same attitude where I used to live, you get beat up or shot up.
Right. It's kind of like being that gazelle by the watering hole. It's like, oh, hey, it's safe to drink this water, and then
absolutely,
yeah, things can go bad quick.
Yeah.
So after you retired from the police force, did you go immediately to work for Delta Defense? Was that something you were considering as you were approaching your departure from the police department?
So no, I didn't really even think about it that way. I went to work for a good group of guys. It was a security integrator company, and they dealt with like artificial intelligence and security and all these things that are just cutting edge that make you safe. And good group of guys, but it was like a kind of a Monday through Friday, and go to this golf outing and stuff like that. And that really wasn't my thing. And then I ran into Dominic Catanella, who was actually, I should back this up. So when I first retired, Illinois Retired Officer Concealed Carry Association, that's run by the Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standard Boards, they tell retired officers that, hey, now that you're retired, you don't have any police powers. You're not the police, and it'd probably be a smart move to go get some insurance, right? So I went and I checked out some of the places out there, and I found the USCCA, and I loved it just because it's education and the training and the insurance, and I kind of got my wife into it. She was always really reluctant, but now that I was retiring, I had more time, right? And this is kind of getting sidetracked, but the funny thing is, like, I've been able to teach plenty of people how to shoot and shoot well, but when it's your spouse or your kids, right? You got to bring in somebody else, which is
Farm that out,
right?
every time,
because of course Dad doesn't know what he's doing, right? Exactly. But so anyway, I went and I had gotten the insurance, and I really didn't think much about it. And then I said I was working for that other company, and really phenomenal group of guys. And then I ran into Dominic Catanella, who I had known from Chicago. And he was like, hey, I work for USCC. And I'm like, yeah, matter of fact, I've got their insurance. And so he was like, hey, we've got an opening in Indiana. And so I applied for it. And I love getting out there. We spent a lot of time like finding instructors, just like how I kind of stalked you, Leigh.
You didn't have to stalk much. I mean, because it was the same experience, right? You came to see me, and you're like, hey, would you like to come on board? And I'm like, I already have USCCA insurance. Right.
So yeah, it was like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
So like a big part of my job is, finding instructors, talking at these classes. And I think maybe I talk a little bit more than some of the other guys when I go out there, just because I've, been around the charging and the prosecution and deciding what people are going to get charged with.
That's an interesting perspective that some others may not have.
Yeah, and so like one of the things, a big thing that I notice is like I'll when I go to classes, I'll talk to people, and I'll say, hey, so what are the chances you're going to get arrested or sued, if you're in an incident? And everybody's like, yeah, 100%. I'm like, well, it's never always going to be 100%. There's a lot of variables involved. Each situation is going to be different. But if you get arrested, why are you getting arrested? And everybody kind of looks at you, like, well, because you committed a crime. If you point a gun at somebody, if you shoot at somebody, if you hit somebody, if you hit somebody else, you committed a crime. When you look up the use of force law, in it says right above it, exoneration, and you try telling them, like, you're kind of guilty until you're proven innocent if you used force, right? You're working backwards. And a lot of people don't quite realize that when they get into it, and it's, the eyes pop open, and it's like, whoa, okay.
Yeah, sometimes there's a gasp or two. It's like,
right, and I tell people, I'm not saying that to scare you away from it. I just want you to be prepared. I want you to, know what you're doing to the best of your abilities, because nobody's ever going to come out and say, when you're forced into that incident, it's going to be one guy and he's going to be 20 feet away and there's going to be nobody behind him. That's not reality.
No, it isn't. And on our last podcast, I told the story about an incident where I almost had to draw my firearm, and it was prior to me really jumping into a lot of training, and that's what prompted me to come back to Leigh to basically say, I want to get better. I want to know if I squeeze the trigger, that bullet is going to end up where I want it to, because when you squeeze that trigger, you own that bullet and everything it does.
Right, it's your baby.
Absolutely.
There's no callbacks, right?
Right, and it can be a scary thought. If a person sits there, and I think often the notion is a person will think of a scenario where they need to use a firearm in self-defense, and it's a very clear-cut scenario. It's like, oh, I'm in a gas station, and they try to rob me, and I use my firearm, and they had a gun, and they were the bad guy, and I did everything right, not realizing you could be at the mall in the courtyard with 40 other people around, and it's not a 3-yard shot. It's a 25 or 30-yard shot, and you could miss.
And there's people running around, and it's panic, and it's
And
chaos.
it's chaos, right? Absolutely. And I would say that that's probably as likely as a scenario that people paint in their head. But that's really where some of the USCCA comes in, right? Because you have that insurance. But one of the other things I like a lot about the USCCA is on their website, and once you're a member, the access to information and training.
Right, the Protector Academy.
Absolutely. That, for me, I consider that as valuable.
Right, and you know what? It's a shame that so many more people don't jump on that, because, and that's really where the USCCA started. You know, the insurance is kind of just an afterthought, right? It started off as a magazine, but it was really education and training. A lot of people don't take nearly as enough advantage of that Protector Academy as they should. Because
They've got some great. We both went up to the convention in Milwaukee last year, and the books, the information that it's. I don't want to say it's endless because it's not, but you can find just about anything you want.
I'd say it is going to be endless, because they keep pumping out new information. The second they find a new need for something else, there's going to be a new video, new guide, anything like that on it. And so, you know, I kind of tell people when I go in these classes, like, that 16 hours is just enough training to kind of get yourself into trouble. You know, when people come in, you know, some people might have a background. Some people maybe did a lot of research, and I'm sure you see it, Leigh. Like, some people come in and they know the stuff already, and there's other people, something scared them. They're here for this class, and they're like drinking from a fire hose. All this information they're taking in, and they're not going to retain it. You know, there's just too much information, and you know, we talk about this in the classes. I'm like, you know, I know Leigh does a great job at how much you're going to retain, and I think nobody wants to say it in front of you that, like, oh, I'll only retain a little bit. I think they all have their best intention, like, I'm going to remember all this, but then when it sets in, it's like, wow.
Yeah, there's just no way.
Right, and so that's really where the USCCA comes in with that education and training, because a lot of people do that 16 hours, and they kind of do that set it and forget it, and they don't think much about it. And they don't realize that if you're in an incident 3 years from now, how much of that is perishable, how much of it's gone away. And, you know, what a terrible spot you put yourself in by not having that preparation ready. You know, that all goes away so fast, and if you haven't prepared for it, you're going to have some problems.
Yeah, and that comes back to what you mentioned earlier, the continual training. Because when you continue to train, it's not like one training session picks up where the last one left off. There's always a little bit of review. So some of it's repetitive, but that repetitive just in nature is what allows people to learn, so that by the time maybe somebody takes a 15th class with Leigh on some of his training, some of what was covered was also covered in the previous 14.
Correct.
But now it's ingrained, because there's been 14 sessions that we've gone over point X.
For sure, that repeated exposure is what helps the likelihood that you'll be able to tap into some of that training when you're at your worst, which will be the day, inevitably, right, when that thing happens to you that you never thought would, or had hoped and prayed that never would. Right. If it did, you know, hopefully you'll be able to tap into it, and that repeated exposure makes that much more likely. If you go to a class once and then, like, you know, most people, it's like they come to their renewal, and you know, 5 years later they haven't done any training at all. Do
you see that a lot?
Yes.
When giving a
Absolutely.
renewal, and you ask somebody between getting your license and now, how much have you know, how many times have you fired or gone to the range or trained? Is it common that is a very low amount of
Yes.
time? Yep.
Yes. I think a lot of the places that offer concealed carry don't offer any other training. Like that's their bread and butter, and like that's what they do the most of.
Gotcha.
And so there's not an effort put into that. but I think even so, I think for a lot of people, it's going to be they're checking that box, and they sort of move on afterward. Maybe there were some good intentions at first, and it does it's sort of like the New Year's Eve, the New Year's resolution to work out, and you go do a couple workouts, and pretty soon you're off the wagon. So I think there's all kinds of reasons why people don't, but I do encounter it plenty where people haven't trained since their last concealed carry. I like to think that a decent percentage of my students are starting to train more. We've been talking about ever since I met Carl, like additional training and whatever motivates you.
Sure.
Like if there's a specific instructor that you really like and you want to train with them and they're competent, which I think most are. I don't have a lot of experience with, you'd maybe be able to speak to that more, but I think most instructors are decent.
Yes, absolutely. And I think yours is a lot different because all your students are kind of like family, right?
They become that way.
Right, yeah. You have the same people come in continually. I mean, obviously, you get your new students and stuff like that, but I think once you're here, you see a lot of them.
Yeah, what has happened is my family's grown. I worried about that when I first started. I was like, who's going to be coming into my home? And what I found out is that, I'm not sure that anybody that would go into a gun store and buy a gun would be someone I would recommend that you automatically become friends with. But what I've learned is that if you know someone who has trained with firearms, that's probably a really conscientious person.
Right.
They take responsibilities very, very seriously. And they consider themselves people that other people can depend on. Those are the kinds of people I want to surround myself with.
Right.
And so, the people that train with me, they become like extended family, because they're just, that's the kind of person that they are.
I remember when I came to one of your first classes, and there was a family in there. It was a husband and a wife, and they had some grown children, and you were like, "Oh yeah, what are you doing for Christmas?" And it was
Yeah.
it was kind of like old home week. I completely felt like the outsider in that one.
Yeah.
But that's good when you have that relationship with your students. Those are the people who are going to keep coming back and keep training, and they're not going to be the people who go for their 5-year renewal and miss the first 10 rounds.
Yeah, Joe and I are examples of that too. Like our friendship has blossomed
That's how we met.
out of training.
Reaching out to take the initial class, and then subsequently taking it with my wife. And until then, I had no idea who Leigh Castle was.
I didn't know Joe Dano from Adam. I didn't know Carl Gray from Adam. But I as I sit here, you gentlemen are some of the best people that I've known in my life.
Appreciate that.
And I'm not trying to,
I could say that exactly about you two, and what you guys have on me is you both have like action hero names. Joe Dano and Leigh Castle. How am I the guy that
got
was
the
a
best.
cop?
Get out of here.
I'm Carl Gray. That sounds like
You got the best CIA name.
Right, absolutely.
I would have took Leigh Castle or any day of the week, or Joe Dano. Yeah, that sounds like a buddy cop movie. So
Castle and Dano.
yeah, exactly. You guys should have T-shirts made. So
Careful, we might do that.
oh, nice.
Good times.
Yeah, absolutely. With the getting back to some of what the USCCA offers, I know that there's a tiered system for different types of coverage on the insurance side of it. Does signing up on any one of those tiers gain somebody access to all of the information that the USCCA offers?
So the way I'd put it is, so there's 3 levels. There's gold, platinum, and elite. And all 3 levels have the same benefit of insurance, right? So for covered incidents, there's no limit to defense expenses, criminal and civil. That covers use of force experts, expert witnesses, private detectives, all that stuff. So if you were sued and damages awarded in a civil case, there's up to $2 million available, right? Also, there's like $100,000 cost of bail expense if you were arrested and you had to make bond. So if you had $1 million bond, there's up to $100,000 available, $20,000 for incidentals, and up to $750 a day for lost wages. So that's the insurance component, and that's the same for all 3 levels. After that, you need to decide, how much education and training you need. The gold has a small amount of training. The platinum has about half of the training the USCCA has, and the elite has literally every lesson, every guide. I think when you get into there, it's about 450 lessons, about 80 hours worth of training, and you could just take it whenever you want. There's no mandated training. It's all up to you. Take it as slow or as fast as you want, and all that training counts as documented and discoverable training, which is huge.
Yeah, and the difference in that coverage isn't extensive. That I would think just that training is worth that difference over and over again.
Right, and I tell people all the time, I'm like, get into it, work with it, don't overdo yourself. But sometimes when you get into it, it's that Protector Academy is kind of like Netflix, right? We've all binge watched something on Netflix, right?
Yeah,
where we
sure.
got hooked into it, and that's kind of like that. Maybe you're doing that 10, 15 minutes a day, but when you find something you like, you're just going to drive down into it, and get as much of it as you can.
And from my trainer perspective, I think it's great. If I don't care what motivates a person to pursue education and training. If it's watching the videos, if it's reading a book, if it's the Mantis X, like whatever it is that drives you to move in the directions where you're gaining education and responsibility in this realm, you've taken this responsibility to arm yourself. And whatever makes that happen, or whether it's just a instructor that you really like that's pursue it.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's ever sat around after an incident, no matter what the category, said, you know what, I just trained way too much for that. I went way too far to train myself for this particular occasion.
Sure.
Right. Yeah. I've never heard that, but I have heard people say, "Oh God, if I didn't do this,
Or I wish I had known."
Right.
Yep.
If I had known, if I had practiced a little bit harder, because people don't think about it. I think that the state of Illinois gives people kind of a false sense of security, and this might sound bad, and I don't mean it to, but when they go into that booth and they shoot those 30 rounds and it's up close and there's no pressure and there's no stress, and I'll see people shoot those 30 rounds in that ridiculously easy course, and they have this sense of accomplishment, and you kind of want to tell them, like, this is the absolute bottom, right? You need to work up from here.
It's really ironic you say that. I went out shooting on Sunday. Right? Both of my brothers went with me, and my younger brother was asking me about the qualifications to get a concealed carry. And the targets I typically use are targets that are typically used for zeroing. It'll be 5 targets on a 16 by 16, and you have your 1-inch squares. And I've always focused a little bit more on accuracy. So I like knowing all those numbers. So as my brother was shooting and he's asking me, I told him, I said, well, you would have been fine. Like, and he goes, really? Because this one's all, and I'm like, no, listen, it's a silhouette. If you can hit that page 30 times, you're 100% okay, because the target's actually quite a bit bigger than that. But you don't even have to hit it 30 times. 21, is that the number?
Got to get a C.
Yeah.
And he was amazed. He's like, that's all it takes? I'm like, that's all it takes in Illinois.
So I put it to people like this, and I'll ask both of you. So should the civilian qualification be the same or easier or harder than the police qualification, or should they be the same?
My answer is, from a perspective of getting a concealed carry license, there shouldn't be a qualifier.
Okay. I could see it. Like, I could see where you're coming from.
I'm a constitutional carry, so, but I'm also a huge proponent of training. And that's kind of where you get into some of the gray area for some people, right? Is that the U.S. Constitution says that we can own and carry a firearm. My point is that if you're going to own and carry a firearm, you should be proficient with that firearm. So I would like to see people take the initiative and the responsibility to be proficient, to be able to shoot way better than what Illinois requires, while also thinking Illinois shouldn't require anything.
No, I see where you're coming from. That makes a lot of sense. I can agree with that. I wish everybody was that responsible where we could.
That's where I was going with the question. I was sort of like, I wish that, if I could make the world my way, it would be that every person had that as a personal expectation of themselves, that they perform the same or better.
Right. And unfortunately, we don't see it. And a lot of times when people come into these qualifications, they're just thrilled that they had that, right? That they met that minimum. And I tell them, if you were to do basically the standard, or what retired police officers have to do. So as a retired police officer, I have to go shoot every year, not once every 5 years.
Okay.
And when I do that, I have to shoot, my qualification is 8.5 by 14. Not this.
At what distance?
The same distances.
Okay, gotcha.
The same distances, but it's 2 rounds, 6 seconds. 2 rounds, 6, and that's still a fairly easy qualification. But when I go to these classes and I tell people, I'm like, if this was the standard that you were going to have to shoot today, how many of you would have came and practiced?
Right.
Everybody raises their hand.
Sure.
I'm like, how many of you would have practiced for the last month? Absolutely. And I'm like, well, you're just coming here to take a test today. This is not your life. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you put a little bit more effort into your life and making sure that you come home to your children, that you don't leave your spouse widowed or widower? But what I do like to tell people when I go into the classes and we talk about that seriously easy qualification at 21 out of 30, I tell people, I'm like, hey, Joe, do you remember when you took your driving test?
I actually do.
Okay. Roughly what area did you live in?
Joliet.
Joliet? Okay. So if you turned on to Route 30 when you were taking that driving test and you plowed over 9 people at a bus stop, what would happen?
Probably wouldn't have ended up with my license that day.
You wouldn't have got your license?
No.
And so that's what I tell people. I'm like, you can miss 9 times at this ridiculously easy, and they're still like, hey, here's your license. Thanks for coming. Train to a higher standard because, it's going to be your life, your loved ones.
Absolutely.
If you don't know what you're doing and you hit somebody else because you didn't feel it was worth the time to go and train and spend a little bit of effort on it. So.
Yep. And a lot of that comes back to, I'm sure we've all heard all sorts of excuses, right? Oh, the range is a half hour away. Ammunition so expensive. I don't have the time. But that's when it comes back to, dry fire in your living room.
Yeah, and even if you watch a video that helps with use of force,
so there's
you name it.
There's another instructor who's a good friend of mine. His name's Kevin Arias. And, when people come into the renewals and they look nervous and stuff, he's like, no, I get it. 5 years isn't a lot of time to practice. So let's go. And people are always, wait a second.
Yeah.
But it's the truth. It's the God's honest truth,
It really is. But I'm sure you're aware of at least a couple people that during some of the chaos during the pandemic, some of the scares, previous non-gun owners decided that they wanted to then purchase a firearm if they had to protect their family. And they bought it in the day that they were able to receive it, took it into the range, used it, and it sat in the dresser drawer since that day.
I love to buy those guns.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. No,
Yeah.
I wish that those people would, that's maybe like the person who, and this might not be a great analogy, but somebody who smoked forever. And then they had that one scare, and then I didn't die, so
I'm good to go.
Smoking, right?
I'm in the clear.
Yeah, no, there's nothing saying that bad stuff can't happen again.
And if somebody had the realization, or maybe the realization is the mental aspect of it, where the fear is the emotional. So if somebody went to go buy a firearm out of fear, and then the riots have calmed down, that emotion is gone. Where if you're purchasing a firearm because you genuinely have thought about it and you think that that's what you need and should do, you could probably argue successfully that a month later you should still be thinking that. The thought hasn't changed. Even though maybe what's going on in the news or something that happened a town over, has stopped. You know, that emotion is gone, but the mental aspect of it is the same. A person went to go purchase a firearm because mentally they thought it was a good idea to protect themselves or their family. 30 days later, 45 days later, that is still the same idea. It's still the right concept, but it's mental as opposed to emotion.
And if you'd asked that person if they wished they had the training before or after, I think everyone would have said, I wish I had some kind of training before.
Absolutely. Any other questions you had, Leigh, for Carl, or anything else you
Well,
want?
we could, edit this out if we need to. But
I like where this
come on,
is
it's
going.
not going to be that. It's not going to be that juicy, really. I set you up for disappointment.
We're not editing anything.
Yeah,
Oh, that's rough.
you guys. What's your EDC? What do you carry?
Oh, so I carry a Glock 43X. I always carry an extra magazine. I should be carrying more first aid stuff.
Glock 43X with an extra mag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just
Do you want to share with the listeners what you load up with?
I'm probably going to sound like an idiot here, but I just always go to Rail Heron, and I would always just say, give me a box of 9 duty ammo.
Okay.
I know, especially with the smaller 9s, you go back and forth. Okay, maybe I should carry a 115 or a 124. I never drive down that much on the ballistics.
Yeah.
Is where I probably should.
You sound like a guy that I know named Lee Castle.
Oh, okay. So
I
you're
don't
not
go down
as-
the rabbit hole that much.
The three of us are sitting at the same table. That's for certain.
Okay. Yeah, because I've heard some people, where they really like, especially you're carrying a subcompact 9.
Yeah, for sure. And
Carrying this
and
one.
there is really good reason. It's just really on my part. I won't speak for either of you. It's laziness on my part.
Yeah, and I'm pretty much in the same boat. I did pick up recently SIG P 320. Is it the carry? It's the mid-size one. So I think that there's the compact, the carry, and then there's the full size. So I have the mid-size one, and I want to start doing a little bit more shooting with that. Forever, I was just like a Glock guy. Well, I should back up. So when I was in the Chicago Police Department, everything was double action only.
Yeah.
So it's like ridiculous.
Was it really?
Oh, ridiculously obnoxious long trigger pulls. So I
What was that motivation? Was that a stiffer, longer trigger pull would reduce negligent discharges?
I think so.
Yeah.
They never told us that, but so when you think about the Chicago Police Department, especially back then, 13,500 people. I think they're somewhere like 9,000 now. I can't speak for the specific number. That's a massive amount of people that you're just taking, going from being everyday citizens to, hey, we're going to teach them how to shoot. We're going to do all this.
Sure.
So you're probably not going to do SIG 226s with the decocking lever and stuff. Like, you're trying to make it as simple as possible.
Too complicated.
Right.
Gotcha.
And, you're trying to avoid those accidental.
Yeah, because not every police officer is a gun guy, right? Let's face it.
So I think that's changed dramatically. Like, when I first got on, there was all kinds of gun guys, and they're like, hey, I just bought this, I bought that. And, the guys reloading and stuff like that. And I remember, I was like, I got this great job, and I'm going to buy guns all the time, right? Because I like to shoot, and it was enjoyable. And so, like, when you'd come across, like, another copper that, I've only got one gun. I'm like, how do you get by with just one gun? That's impossible, So, yeah, they were double action only. And then when I went to Berwyn, I started carrying Glocks pretty much just religiously. I carried a Glock 21 on duty all the time, and that was a great gun, phenomenal. And then when I retired, I picked up the 43X. I thought it was nice because I spent so much time in the car going from class to class. But if I was actually in an incident, I think I'd want something with a little more meat on it, a little more real estate, and that's why I picked up that SIG. But I just haven't started carrying it yet.
Haven't put the time in on it.
Well, I don't want to boast, but I know I shoot phenomenally with it.
All right.
Yeah,
Great.
good.
And it's it feels more like like an old school like real gun with all the metal in it and stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound a little weird? But
No, actually, a bunch of the companies are going back to metal frames and stuff like that. Like yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's just so I really enjoy it, but it's just a little too big to carry all the time, especially when I'm in and out of classrooms.
I hear you.
And stuff like that. This is easier to conceal and get tucked away. I thought you were going to hit me with like a doozy of a question there.
Well, I don't know. Some people don't like to share their. For some people, their EDC is kind of intimate.
Yeah, no.
So they're just like, I don't want to.
And I'm pretty much the same way. So that's why I only told you about one of the guns that I carry. So if somebody was stalking me, they wouldn't know about that. No, I'm kidding. No.
Appendix or strong side?
Appendix.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's another thing that, well, and this might get slightly off topic, but if you ever saw how policemen used to carry guns, like their off duties was ridiculous. Did you ever see when guys would take like the rubber bands and wrap it around the grip of the 38 to like just tuck it in their dress pants?
Yeah, inner tubes.
Is that what that was for? So that it had more bulk and it
Yeah,
wouldn't
so
slide
like
past
it wouldn't
the belt?
stick, or those stupid Barami hip grips. Do you remember seeing those?
Yeah, is that the one that had it was like it had a little plastic.
Had a little lip on it, like
Lip
on
on
the
it,
hand.
yep.
Like what a
Yeah.
terrible idea was that? Anyway, I remember seeing people carry some guns in really stupid manners.
Yeah.
But when you think about it now, I mean, there's just everything out there as far as you can get a holster to carry anything, any way you want, and good quality too.
Yeah, the sky's the limit.
Right.
Nowadays.
I really like where a lot of that has gone, and maybe it's me with some of my timing of when I kind of jumped into the rabbit hole of firearms, but it just seems in the past 6 or 7 years, the options for a concealed carry a firearm that's specifically designed for concealed carry, and then the accessory market to support it has just blown up in the past 6 or 7 years.
Not just that, just the belts.
Yeah.
The belts are huge. I mean, it's so a big part of my career. I worked tech, so it was plain clothes, but you were wearing your like maybe sometimes just a pancake holster and your handcuffs and extra magazines. Those the belts you had, they didn't make belts specifically for that. If you were just wearing your regular belt, you're constantly pulling your pants up and it looks ridiculous. A lot of guys ended up wearing just their duty belts with it too. But when you leave work after you've been wearing your jeans all day, it's still it's not set for it. Now they got the Nexit belts and all these red.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean the options are endless.
Yeah, and that's interesting. That's a topic that we haven't really discussed too much in terms of the way people carry a concealed firearm, because different style holsters, whether it's Kydex, whether it's leather, whether somebody's using a traditional leather belt or if they're using a gun belt, if it's appendix, and it's that whole arena has changed a lot.
Sure has. For the better.
I love it.
Yeah.
I mean, you can. I think you'd be really hard pressed to want to do something in terms of carry a firearm and not be able to.
Right. That's an excellent point.
Between holsters. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the holsters that incorporate the magazine holder into the holster.
Okay.
If people are, I think that's great. But even magazine holsters or holders, I mean, those have come a long way.
Yeah, I mean it's and now I mean think about it. You can go buy a pair of jeans that have a space for your magazine, right?
Go buy a motorcycle vest. Almost all of them now incorporate.
So
They'll advertise.
CCW pocket.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would love to do that, but I don't know how to ride a motorcycle, and I would look a little weird just
Vest.
Swap around
getting
with
out
it.
of my Prius with a vest. Like it would just. No, I don't have a Prius.
It's a hot look.
Yeah. But
That's how I get
no.
chicks to dig me.
I lost a lot of milk money as a kid. So
But concealed carry built into hoodies, jackets.
what's that one brand? I was in Tennessee recently, and there was an outlet for the store. Was it Ariat? I think it is.
Yeah.
Oh, like all their stuff's there, concealed carry compatible, like all over it,
Yeah.
and everything. And I was like, wow, this is. You don't find that in Cook County, like.
No. But it is interesting because talking to a lot of people in different trades, a lot of times I'll ask them, do you work for a company that allows you to conceal carry? Because it is interesting to me, especially some construction companies. Sometimes these guys are going into areas that aren't great areas. If there's a power outage, it could be at 1 a.m. And I get a lot of different answers. One, I won't mention the company, but one answer was they will allow us to carry a concealed firearm while we're working under the condition we're also wearing a tack vest.
Oh, really?
And he said, and that makes it really uncomfortable when it's, 96 degrees, and it's high humidity. He goes, nobody wants to wear that vest.
And they're doing that rough type work. I mean,
Yeah.
I could tell you just standing on a corner with that stuff on is
Right.
is miserable, let alone if you're
Digging a trench?
right. Oh,
Not enjoyable.
yeah, that's
So it's interesting that a company would put that caveat into allowing them.
and you got to wonder if that was maybe an attorney who was not well versed on it, saying like, "Oh, hey, if they're doing this, well, we should come up with this." That's sometimes when you have people making the rules who really are maybe have the best intention, but
Don't really know everything that's involved with what they're talking about.
right,
Like politicians writing rules about firearms in Illinois.
exactly, right on the money.
Yeah. So, but with that, before we conclude the podcast, what I regularly do is encourage our listeners to vote. Make sure you register. Encourage others around you to register, because specifically here in Illinois, there is a lot of legislature that needs to get turned around, and the only way that's going to happen is if we get the right people in office fighting for gun rights of our citizens, to respect the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, respect the Constitution in Illinois. So I would like everybody to pay attention a little bit to what's going on locally, because that has a big impact. But make sure you register, make sure you get out there and vote, do a little bit of research, and get some pro 2A politicians in the right offices, because if it keeps going the other way, Illinois is going to keep slipping down that slippery slope.
And not just the politicians, but when you're voting for judges,
Yeah.
the same thing. I have met some amazing pro 2A judges in the state, and then there's some who just atrocious, where they don't want anybody having anything, but then they're surrounded by a bunch of sheriffs when they're working. Right?
And I have a lot of trouble understanding that because of that specific hypocrisy. But then also, and maybe you shouldn't make this assumption, but I assume a judge would be well versed in the law, which would include the Constitution that they're typically sworn to uphold to protect. And there's not a lot of interpretation in that Second Amendment to me. So to have judges or prosecutors that actively go against it, I have so much trouble understanding.
No, they play with the words, right?
I have a lot of trouble understanding how a judge or a district attorney or a prosecutor could look at certain cases and bring charges when the right to carry a firearm is so ingrained in our Constitution, and it really isn't up to interpretation to me. The way it's written, the way it's read, it's been clarified with what some of the verbiage in 1792, what the words then would translate to what it is now. So
Right.
when people hear the word militia, what militia do you belong to? Well, I can answer that if you want, but let's back up and see if that's what was really intended to be part of a militia. That's run through the courts, and to not even do away with the FOID system in Illinois anymore, it's been deemed unconstitutional. It then gets appealed, but it has been deemed unconstitutional.
Yeah. So I think there's something there about no fees and licensure or something like
Yeah.
that. It's in the small print, or
Yeah. And in not that I agree with people, but if they want to make the argument that the FOID system was in place, so somebody that wants to go purchase a firearm, the person they're buying it from, the store or the person, knows they've been checked. We're good. I've got this FOID. But that doesn't happen either. There's still the background
They
check.
still have to go through it again.
They still have to go through everything. So that card is proving nothing.
So Chicago used to, and I'm not sure if they still do this. I obviously don't have to do it anymore, but they had a firearm registration. Were you familiar with that?
I think that got removed.
Yeah, they used to. So you'd have to fill out this card, put your picture on it.
So you'd go to the precinct? And
Yeah, you would drop it off there.
Yeah.
And it was it was ridiculous. They never. I don't think it was well tended to, and I'll tell you why. So one of these days, I was working, and I was going up to the desk to get something, and I see my uncle, and he's at the counter. He's in line to the counter, and he's got a shotgun case with him. I'm like, hey, Uncle Dutch, what are you doing? And he's like, you know what? I put in this this thing every year. This rotten. What did I just say?
the registration?
The registration. Yeah.
Annually,
Yeah.
they had to do it.
Annually,
Oh, I didn't know that.
right?
Yeah, okay.
And he was an old timer, never been in trouble, lifelong union carpenter. He was in his late 70s at this point, and he's like, I'm coming in to do my gun registration for this. He goes, or no, I'm sorry, let me back that up. He was coming to turn in his shotgun, and I said, why are you turning that in? And he's like, well, because
I don't want to do this anymore.
He goes,
I'm
"Because
tired of registering."
He was. They beat him into submission.
Yeah.
And I said, let's get your FOID out, and you just give that to me. And so we did, which was nice. And I registered it. He hadn't done any hunting in some time, but that's like I said, they just beat him into submission. Turn in your stuff.
I think there's areas that is 100% the intent, to make it so difficult that it's just, for a certain amount of people, it's just not worth it. It's to discourage and to put so many hurdles in place that are just designed to stop somebody.
Right, and back then, if they caught you with a firearm, and you had your FOID, they would confiscate it, and it was like a ticket, but you lost your gun.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, that was commonplace, And this is probably going to sound really ridiculous, and you're going to jump over the table and want to strangle me. But as far as having concealed carry in Illinois compared to when I started, anybody with a handgun in Chicago was like, get him up, lock him up. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And so back in the day when this first came about, I remember there were some cops who were like, oh, this is a terrible idea, because that was all they knew.
Right.
And now it's
that the streets would flow with blood.
right, just that ridiculous. And I remember thinking, when you're out there a couple of times on New Year's Eve and just everybody's shooting at everything, which is completely irresponsible. Those are people who shouldn't have guns anyway. Yeah. But you think about what can go wrong. But it worked out pretty nicely.
Grandpa Joe in heaven, you hear that?
Yeah.
It was wrong what you did on New Year's Eve.
There's been strides forward in terms of the Second Amendment as a whole, as a country, I would say. Unfortunately, in Illinois, we've moved a couple steps backwards. I think we're at 28 or 29 states that are now constitutional carry.
So I'll give you that, but compared to what we were 20 years ago,
Sure.
This went from the biplane to walking on the moon.
Absolutely.
And we just need to keep working at it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that supports the whole concept of voting in the right people,
Right.
and making sure that FOID holders and gun owners of Illinois are being respected and being, there's a lot of us, and I sure as hell hope that most of the gun owners are paying attention and voting for their self-interest. Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of people that don't pay attention. They don't care to. It's a lot of stuff. There's a lot going on. Without paying attention and without voting and encouraging and educating people, which is part of what we're trying to do, we could slip backwards. I agree with you. From 20 years ago till now, we're further ahead. But I also think right now, compared to 2 years ago, we've slipped backwards.
Right. I would agree with you.
Any registration on any firearms is unconstitutional. And, there's a long list of them that are supposed to be registered as of January 1st. And it's not right.
Right. No, and I wasn't even thinking about that when we were talking about it. My brain was pulling me back into the day when, this guy's got a handgun, that guy's got a handgun. And, you'd be running around the streets and people are pitching them. And,
Yeah.
but granted, those were all being used in crimes and stuff. But
those people today probably still shouldn't have them.
Well, and this takes me, this might sidetrack it a little bit, so if you have to do
Yeah.
editing or whatever, but going back to when we were talking about the appendix carry and how do people carry and everything like that, I think it's been about 6 times in my career where I got calls, or I wrote on one where somebody said they were walking down the street and somebody shot them in the rear end. What happened was they were carrying their gun,
Shot themselves.
went to take it out and shot themselves in the can. And, when you're at the hospital and you're like, okay, keep telling me that story, right? I get it. How come there's no hole in the outside of your pants? Which is why you spend the money on a good holster, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that'll have to be the topic of one of our podcasts as far as equipment, because I've seen it done the wrong way.
Yeah.
Just name that podcast. How come there's no hole in your pants?
I like that. I may do that.
On that, maybe that's the best way to end the podcast,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
This one's shot in the ass.
All right. Well, Carl, thank you very much for coming to do this with us. We really appreciate it. I had a blast doing it.
Yeah, it was.
You're the man, Carl Gray. Thanks for coming out. Yeah,
Thanks
this is a good
for,
one.
Thanks
Yeah.
for making Carl Gray sound cool, Lee
Yeah,
Castle.
it is, man.
Joe Dano.
Tell you, I said it right away.
Well, thank you very much for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Best.